The Corel had once been a race of power and grandeur, their empire, stretching across star systems, their technology, unmatched by any known species. But that was before the Zothri of brutal and merciless empire had turned their eyes toward them. What followed was a war unlike any before. The Kyrell had fought valiantly, but the Zothri were relentless. Their overwhelming numbers and unmatched cruelty were too much to overcome despite their advancements. The Kyrell found themselves outmatched and outgunned. One by one their great cities fell, their fleets shattered, their people scattered to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Now exiled to a distant and desolate corner, the Kyrell were no longer a threat, their name nothing more than a whisper in the darkness of space. But as their world lay in ruins and their people dwindled in number, the Kyrell knew they could not survive on their own. Not against the Zothri, who would return to finish what they had started. In their final act of desperation, the Kyrell turned to a species they had long regarded with indifference, humanity. They had watched from the shadows as humanity began its rise across the stars, observed from afar. As Earth began to conquer the void, the Kyrell knew that despite their frailty, the humans were different. They had something. The Kyrell had lost a fierce will to survive, an unyielding resolve that had allowed them to thrive in the harshest conditions. It was a long shot, the Kyrell knew that, but it was their only hope. With the Zothri fleet approaching, they had no time to waste, so they sent a signal, a simple transmission aimed at the nearest human colony, hoping against hope that someone would hear it, pleading for defense, begging for salvation from the brink of annihilation. Their message was a desperate cry for help, one that resonated with the weight of a dying species, clinging to the last threads of hope. Yet across the stars, it would be received by only one person, a lieutenant stationed on a remote outpost on Calamar 3. Lieutenant Anna Voss had seen it all: war, poverty, despair, but nothing prepared her for the message that flashed across her console, a faint transmission from a distant star system. The words were garbled and distorted, but the desperation was unmistakable. It was a call for help, a plea from a species on the verge of extinction. At first, Anna thought it was a mistake, a malfunction, something that could be easily ignored, but something about the message caught her attention. There was a sincerity in the tone, a raw fear that she couldn't shake. She listened again and again, trying to make sense of the alien language that crackled through the static. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Something was more than just a simple distress call. Anna knew the Kyrell were known to be a weak race. Their technology was said to be old, and their military was all but gone. Yet here, they were calling for help. Perhaps the transmission was a trap, but if there was even a sliver of truth to their plea, she couldn't ignore it. Against the advice of her superiors, Anna began her investigation into the Kyrell. Desperate plea, she pulled all available resources to track the source of the signal and analyze its contents. With each passing moment, the weight of the decision grew heavier. She was a soldier trained to follow orders, to complete missions. But this was different. This wasn't just a call to arms. This was a plea from a species on the brink of extinction. And no matter what, she had to know the truth. Anna stood before the communications console, her fingers hovering above the controls as the alien transmission echoed in her mind. Despite the years of military training and the countless operations she had led, there was something different about this one, something unsettling. She had always been taught to trust her instincts, and right now those instincts were telling her that this wasn't just another routine mission. This was something more personal, something she could not ignore. She reran the transmission for the fourth time, each repetition offering little more than the same distorted crackles and fragmented words. But amid the chaos of static, she could just make out one word repeated over and over: asterisk, asterisk, help, asterisk, asterisk. It wasn't a command or an order, it was a plea, a cry for aid from a species whose name had become synonymous with weakness and defeat. She had read the reports of the Kyrell, their rise and fall, their history now buried under the heel of the Zothri. But that history was almost all that remained. The Kyrell were no longer a factor in galactic politics. They were scattered and broken far from the bright center of human expansion. Anna felt her skepticism rise as her fingers danced across the console, pulling up what little information she could find about the Kyrell. Their homeworld was uninhabitable, now reduced to ruins by the wars. Their technology was outdated, their society fractured beyond repair. What could they possibly offer that was worth humanity's attention? The thought of wasting valuable resources on a species so frail seemed absurd, yet her gut told her that the Chiral might hold a secret, something far more dangerous than their enemies realized. The Chiral were known to have been technologically advanced. Once their innovations had shaped the galaxy, they were said to have created weapons and tools capable of unimaginable destruction. But that was before the Zothri came for them. Their empire had fallen, their once glorious cities reduced to rubble, their fleets shattered to dust. Now they were nothing more than an afterthought in the vastness of space. No one had expected them to survive this long, let alone ask for help from humanity. Anna couldn't help but wonder what it meant for the Chiral to be reaching out to humans of all species. Why not the Andromedans or the Taurians, who had better alliances with the remnants of the Chiral's old empire? Why come to a small human outpost at the edge of nowhere? She punched in coordinates and set the ship's course. The decision was made. Calamar 3 was a minor colony in the uncharted reaches of the Outer Rim. Its status was largely ignored by most of the galactic community. The few soldiers stationed there were tasked with minor patrols and keeping the peace between a handful of mining colonies. The outpost wasn't strategic, and the humans stationed there were far from the elite forces stationed on Earth. Yet Anna felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders as she prepared for the journey to the Chiral's last known location. The Council had given her the authority to investigate, but no one expected her to make contact or offer any form of aid. They were expecting a standard report, something she could write off as an anomaly, perhaps a hoax, but Anna couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play here, that the Chiral weren't just asking for protection, they were offering something in return, or at least she hoped they would be. The Zothri were coming, and whatever lay ahead. Anna knew that whatever happened next would determine more than the fate of a single species. It could change the future of the galaxy itself. The journey to the Chiral homeworld was long, fraught with uncertainty, and filled with an unsettling sense of anticipation. The ship carrying Lieutenant Anna Voss and a small crew of hand-picked soldiers moved swiftly through the cold vastness of space, the stars streaking by as they pushed past the usual boundaries of human exploration. The Chiral signal had led them to an isolated system, a place so far from the beaten paths of galactic travel that few ships had ever passed through. Calamar 3, their outpost, was a forgotten corner of the galaxy, but Anna felt the weight of her mission settle more heavily with each passing light year. As they arrived in the system, the first thing Anna noticed was the silence. There were no bustling fleets, no vibrant colonies, no beacons of light from distant cities. The Chiral's homeworld was shrouded in shadow, its surface a vast wasteland. There were no signs of life in orbit, only a scattering of derelict satellites and abandoned stations. The Chiral had been decimated, and now their final plea for help had brought humanity to the very edge of the galaxy. Anna's eyes narrowed as she studied the planet below, wondering how this frail species had survived for so long in such dire straits. Her team began to prepare for descent, but as they drew closer, they noticed something strange. The planet wasn't just a barren wasteland, it was alive in its own way. The air, though thin and toxic, still held traces of what had once been a thriving world. Vast fields of broken technology littered the surface, fragments of ships and cities half swallowed by the planet's toxic environment. In the distance, Anna could just make out the ruins of towering structures that had once been the crowning achievements of the Chiral civilization. What had happened to them? How had they fallen so far? Landing near a surviving Chiral enclave, Anna and her team disembarked, their boots crunching over the cracked earth. They were met by a small group of Chiral survivors, their appearance startling. The Chiral were indeed a frail race, their bodies thin and gaunt, their skin pale and slightly translucent. They moved with an air of exhaustion, their eyes darkened with the weight of years spent hiding, running, waiting for the inevitable. Anna could see the weariness in their faces, the unspoken truth of a people who had been fighting a losing battle for far too long. Yet there was still a spark of something deeper, more resilient than their fragile appearance suggested. The Chiral leader, A tall figure with silver hair that seemed to shimmer in the dim light stepped forward. His voice was calm but laced with a sense of desperation. "We have waited long," he said, his words trembling in the silence. "We have hidden in the shadows, surviving in the ruins of our past. But the Zothri are coming, and we are too weak to face them alone." Anna listened intently as the chiral leader, named Zalek, spoke of the empire they had once been, the pinnacle of technological advancement, and how they had been betrayed by the very beings they had once allied with. The Zothri had once been their partners, sharing knowledge and resources, but the chiral's growing strength had become a threat to the Zothri's power. In response, the Zothri had launched a campaign of destruction, systematically dismantling everything the chiral had built. It was a tale of betrayal, greed, and ambition, one that mirrored many of humanity's own dark chapters in history. As Zalek finished his tale, Anna felt a pang of sympathy. She had expected to find a race of survivors clinging to life out of desperation, but what she found was something else. A people who had been broken, yes, but not defeated. The chiral had lost everything, but their resolve remained. They still fought, still hoped. And as she looked into Zalek's eyes, she understood what he was asking of her, of humanity, not just a defense, but a partnership. "Help us, human," Zalek said, his voice carrying the weight of his people's suffering. "Help us rebuild, and together we can stand against the Zothri." Anna nodded slowly, her mind racing. She had thought this mission would be a simple investigation, a brief interaction with a dying race. But now, standing before her, the chiral's plea for survival had become something more. She wasn't just looking at a species in need of protection. She was looking at potential allies, a people whose knowledge and strength, however diminished, could change the course of the war. The Zothri wouldn't just be an enemy for the chiral, they would be an enemy for all of humanity if left unchecked. The weight of her decision pressed down on her chest. To give the chiral the help they sought would be a monumental risk for humanity. But as Anna looked at the survivors before her, she knew one thing. If she turned away, the galaxy would lose more than just a people. It would lose a chance to unite against a greater threat. And that, she realized, was a risk too great to ignore. The days that followed were filled with urgency and uncertainty. Anna's decision to offer the chiral refuge and potential aid was met with skepticism back at Calamar 3, and the resistance from the Earth Council was palpable. Orders were clear: do not engage with the chiral. Do not risk resources on an alien species that had already shown signs of collapse. But Anna couldn't ignore the plea she had received. The chiral were not just another broken species in the vastness of space. They had once been powerful, and if their story was to be believed, they knew more about the Zothri than any other race. Zalek, the chiral leader, had provided more details in the days following their meeting. The Zothri were not just conquerors. They were relentless, calculating, and their empire stretched across hundreds of systems, each one under their iron fist. Their fleet was vast, their technology formidable, and their cruelty was matched only by their hunger for dominance. The chiral had once been allies of the Zothri, but as their strength grew, the Zothri saw them as a threat to their unchallenged rule. The betrayal had come quickly, and the chiral were forced to flee, abandoning their greatest creations to escape the wrath of their former allies. Now, as Anna looked out over the ruined chiral cities, she couldn't help but feel the weight of their history pressing down on her. The chiral had been the architects of a civilization that rivaled humanity's potential, but now they were little more than refugees, scattered and lost. And yet they held the key to understanding the Zothri. Their knowledge of the Zothri's weaknesses, how they thought, how they moved, was invaluable. The chiral had spent years evading them, learning their ways out of necessity. Anna had her doubts, of course. The chiral were fragile, their bodies weak, and their technology was no match for the advanced weaponry humanity possessed. But they weren't asking for soldiers or weapons. They were asking for knowledge, for guidance, and for a chance to stand once again against their oppressors. And after hearing their story, Anna knew that this was not just about saving a dying species. The Zothri were coming, and if they weren't stopped here, humanity itself would be their next target. Her conversations with Zalek grew more frequent, and she came to understand just how much the Chiral were offering. It was a partnership, a mutual benefit. Humanity had the strength, the firepower, and the numbers. The Chiral had knowledge, detailed records of the Zothri, their strategies, their technology, even their internal divisions. The Chiral had lived on the edge for so long, they had learned to adapt, to survive. And now, Anna realized that knowledge could turn the tide of the coming war. But there was one problem. The Chiral had been scavenging what they could from their ruined world, but their resources were exhausted. They needed more than just protection. They needed infrastructure, ships and weapons to even begin the fight against the Zothri. And despite the knowledge they possessed, their frailty made it difficult for them to rebuild on their own. The decision weighed heavily on Anna. If she chose to support them, it would drain Calamar III's resources. If they lost the fight, it would be humanity that paid the price. As Anna looked out over the desolate landscape of the Chiral homeworld, she felt the gravity of what lay ahead. The Zothri were coming, and every moment spent deliberating was a moment the Chiral didn't have. But what if the Chiral were lying? What if they were using their knowledge to manipulate her, to get access to the resources humanity had worked so hard to build? She could feel the pressure mounting. The Chiral were no longer a forgotten species. They were an urgent matter, a key to defeating the greatest threat humanity had ever faced. She could turn them away and risk losing them to the Zothri, or she could take a leap of faith and offer them humanity's support. Zalek's words echoed in her mind. Asterisk, we will not survive without you, human. But together, we may yet stand against them. Asterisk, and in those words, Anna found the strength to make her choice. She would not let the Chiral fall, not when they still had something to offer, something that could help save both their worlds from the Zothri's wrath. She would fight for them, not just because they needed it, but because humanity needed them too. Anna's decision to help the Chiral was made, but now came the hardest part, convincing the Earth Council to back her. She knew that the higher-ups wouldn't be easily swayed by idealism, especially when it came to allocating resources for a dying alien species. The situation was critical. Calamar III was a small outpost, and the resources available were already stretched thin. Sending aid to the Chiral meant diverting valuable assets that were intended for more pressing matters, such as the protection of human colonies along the frontier. And yet, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the Chiral anymore. The Zothri were coming, and if humanity didn't act decisively now, they might be the next target. It was late when the emergency meeting with the Earth Council finally convened. Anna stood in front of the holoprojector, the faces of the council members flickering above her as she presented her findings. The cold, indifferent stares of the council were familiar to her now, and she steeled herself for the inevitable pushback. She began by detailing the Chiral's request for help, the desperation in their voices, the centuries of suffering they had endured. She spoke of the Zothri's methods, the mass destruction they had wrought, and their unrelenting drive to crush anything standing in their way. The Chiral have knowledge, Anna explained, knowledge that could give us a tactical advantage against the Zothri. They know the weaknesses in their strategies, their technology, and their internal divisions. This is our opportunity to gain insight into the Zothri like no other species can offer. She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. She could feel the tension building as they processed her proposal. She knew the risks. The Chiral were weak, frail, and their technology was outdated. There was no guarantee that their knowledge would be enough to turn the tide against the Zothri, and even if it was, the cost of helping them might be too great. But Anna wasn't just asking for a handout, she was proposing a partnership. We cannot turn our backs on them, Anna continued, her voice steady but firm. If we do, the Zothri will not stop with the Chiral. They will come for us next. If we don't act now, we risk losing more than just the Chiral. We risk losing everything. The room fell silent. She could feel the weight of the council's scrutiny bearing down on her. The minutes stretched out, and for a moment, Anna wondered if they were about to dismiss her outright. But then, the voice of Admiral Creel, a high-ranking member of the council, known for his pragmatic approach to military affairs, broke the silence. Lieutenant Voss, Creel said, his voice gruff, "You've made your case, but what you're asking is a massive gamble. If we divert resources to the Karel, we weaken our own defenses. The Zothri are still a threat, and we can't afford to let our guard down, especially with the instability along the frontier." Anna met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "I understand the risk, sir, but this isn't just about the Karel. The Zothri have already proven that they won't stop once they've started. If we don't act, we'll be fighting a war on two fronts. The Karel might be weak now, but together, we can stand a better chance. We're asking for a partnership, not charity." For a long moment, Creel said nothing. The council members whispered among themselves, their voices low and uncertain. Anna's heart raced. This was it, the critical moment when everything could either fall into place or collapse under the weight of bureaucracy and caution. She needed to make them see the bigger picture. Finally, the chair of the council, a woman named Asha Dragon, spoke up. "You've made a compelling argument, Lieutenant," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We understand the potential advantages of forming an alliance with the Karel. However, we also need assurances that this isn't an illusion. We can't afford to waste precious resources on a dead end." Anna nodded. "I can't promise that everything will go perfectly, but I can promise that the Karel have something we don't. Insight into the Zothri and the will to fight back. They've survived for centuries in the shadow of extinction. If anyone can help us defeat the Zothri, it's them." There was a long pause as the council deliberated, their holographic figures shifting and murmuring in private conversations. Anna's gaze drifted to the window, where the dark expanse of space stretched endlessly beyond the outpost. The weight of the decision felt heavier than ever. Finally, Asha Dragon spoke again. "We will approve your request for assistance," she said, "but understand this, Lieutenant Voss. If this alliance with the Karel fails, it will fall squarely on your shoulders. You will bear the responsibility for every resource we divert, for every risk we take. Do you understand?" Anna took a deep breath, nodding. "I understand, Counselor." And with that, the decision was made. The first step toward an uncertain future had been taken. The Karel would have the support they needed, and humanity would finally learn whether their gamble would pay off, or whether they had just opened the door to a far greater threat. The decision to aid the Karel came swiftly, but the real challenge was only just beginning. With the Earth Council's approval in hand, Anna was tasked with orchestrating a complex operation to bring the Karel back from the brink of total collapse. It wasn't just about sending troops or supplies. The Karel needed a full-scale rebuilding effort, ships to transport their people, resources to repair their technology, and most importantly, weapons to defend themselves from the coming Zothri onslaught. Kalmar 3, the outpost where Anna was stationed, became the hub for this new mission. The base was quickly transformed into a staging ground for the effort. Engineers, logistics experts, and military strategists were brought in to plan the supply lines, while ships were refitted with specialized technology capable of withstanding the harsh conditions of the Chiral homeworld. The Karel were weak, but they weren't without value, and every step had to be executed with precision. Anna's first priority was the Chiral leadership, specifically Zalek. She and a small team of soldiers traveled back to the Chiral enclave, where the surviving members of their species were living in makeshift shelters. The desolation was overwhelming. The ruins of their once grand cities now stood as hollow tombs to their former glory. But despite the shattered world around them, the Karel remained determined. The spark of hope Anna had seen in Zalek's eyes was still there, flickering. Zalek greeted her with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. He had heard of the Council's decision, and though he was thankful, he was also wary of what it would mean for his people. The Karel had long been independent, even in their weakened state, but now they were placing their survival in the hands of a human military machine. "We cannot repay you for what you offer," Zalek said quietly as they stood in the shadow of one of the ruined Chiral citadels. "But I can promise you this. Our knowledge of the Zothri is vast. We will help you in any way we can. We will fight by your side if you are willing to trust us." Anna nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. The Corel had lost everything, yet they still had something valuable: knowledge of the enemy, a kind of insight into the Zothri that humanity had never had access to before. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a chance to gain an upper hand, to understand the Zothri in ways no one else could. And that, she realized, was more valuable than any weapon. As they walked through the enclave, Anna saw the toll the war had taken. The chiral survivors were a weary people, their frail bodies bearing the scars of their years in hiding. But there was a strength in them too, a determination to rebuild, to fight for their future. They had survived the Zothri's attacks for so long by adapting, by learning to survive in the shadows, and now they would do it again, this time alongside humanity. Anna returned to Calamar 3, where the preparations for the Chiral's revitalization were well underway. Supplies were being shipped, ships were being refitted, and engineers were working around the clock to integrate chiral technology with human machinery. It wasn't easy. The Chiral's technology was old, some of it irreparably damaged, but there were pieces, fragments of their former brilliance, that could be salvaged. The humans had the firepower, the numbers, and the organization. The Corel had the knowledge, the wisdom of a species that had once ruled the stars. The real breakthrough came when the Chiral shared their data on the Zothri's fleet. It was detailed: locations of Zothri strongholds, schematics of their ships, and most crucially, information about the Zothri's command structure. The Chiral had spent decades evading the Zothri's reach, learning their tactics, understanding their weaknesses. This was the knowledge humanity had been hoping for. But it wasn't just about fighting the Zothri anymore. Anna had begun to see the Chiral not as a broken species, but as potential allies, an extension of humanity's efforts. They might be frail in body, but their minds were sharp, their resolve unbroken. And if there was one thing Anna knew for sure, it was that the Zothri would not stop with the Chiral. They would eventually turn their sights on humanity. The war was coming, and it would be unlike any conflict the galaxy had ever seen. As the first wave of aid began to reach the Chiral, Anna stood on the observation deck of the command center at Calamar 3, gazing out into the vast unknown. The Zothri were still out there, lurking, waiting. But now, for the first time in a long while, Anna felt the weight of the galaxy shifting in humanity's favor. They weren't alone anymore. The Corel had joined the fight. And together, humanity and the Corel would face the Zothri, not as enemies, but as partners. The alliance between humanity and the Corel was beginning to take shape, but the reality of their combined efforts came with its own set of challenges. While the Chiral provided invaluable intelligence on the Zothri, their weakened state meant they were unable to contribute significantly to the military operations in terms of manpower. The human forces, while prepared to assist, couldn't afford to shift too many resources from other critical defense points. For now, there was a game of information and strategy, and every step had to be calculated carefully. Anna stood in the command center at Calamar 3, surrounded by a diverse group of military officers, engineers, and chiral advisors. The atmosphere was tense as they reviewed the latest intelligence gathered from the chiral archives. The Zothri, though formidable in numbers and firepower, had weaknesses, crucial flaws in their military structure and supply lines. It was this intelligence that was slowly shifting the balance in favor of humanity and its new chiral allies. Zalek and his people had painstakingly reconstructed ancient star maps that pinpointed weak spots in Zothri-controlled space, regions where their defenses were thin or their fleets scattered. The Chiral's historical data on the Zothri's internal divisions was proving to be even more valuable. The Zothri, despite their ruthless pursuit of domination, had factions within their ranks, rivalries between different warlords, power struggles over resources, and distrust between their military and political leaders. This information, combined with the Chiral's knowledge of their advanced weapon systems, was beginning to form the basis for humanity's counteroffensive. But despite the progress, Anna knew they were still in a race against time. The Zothri were not an enemy to be underestimated. They had not yet launched their full invasion, but there was a sense of inevitability hanging in the air, a quiet dread that weighed heavily on everyone. The first Zothri ships had been detected at the edge of the chiral system, a small fleet, but its presence was a clear message. They were coming, and their war against the chiral was far from over. As the meeting continued, Anna felt the familiar pressure of leadership pressing down on her. She had been put in charge of coordinating the defense, but every decision felt like it carried the weight of an entire species' survival. The chiral's fragility was ever present, a stark reminder that they were not soldiers. They were scholars, engineers, survivors, people who had once wielded great power, now reduced to the role of allies, relying on humanity's strength. Zalek's voice broke through her thoughts. "We must strike before they bring their full might to bear," he urged, his pale face set with determination. "We know where their fleets are weakest. We know their tactics. But we need your ships, your soldiers. Our ships are not ready for battle, and our people. We'll have to make do with what we have." Anna interrupted, her voice sharp but not unkind. "You've done more than enough. Now it's time for us to take the fight to them." The plan, as it stood, was daring. They would stage a series of covert strikes against key Zothri installations. Using the chiral's intelligence, they would hit supply lines, disrupt communications, and target outlying Zothri strongholds. The idea was to weaken their resolve, cause internal confusion, and set the stage for a larger offensive. It was a high-risk maneuver, but one that was necessary to buy time for humanity's main fleet to mobilize. But even as the plan took shape, Anna's mind raced with uncertainties. What if the Zothri retaliated faster than expected? What if the chiral's intelligence wasn't as accurate as they hoped? What if their fragile alliance couldn't hold under the pressure of war? Anna turned to Zalek, meeting his gaze. His eyes were tired but resolute. The chiral had no illusions about their place in this fight. They were dependent on humanity, and they knew it. But their courage, their determination, was something Anna couldn't ignore. She had seen it in their eyes, in every interaction with them. These were people who had survived far more than any race should have to endure. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were ready to fight back. "We'll do this together," Anna said quietly, her resolve hardening. "We'll strike first, but this isn't just about hitting the Zothri. It's about showing them that we're not afraid, that the chiral are not finished." Zalek nodded, his voice low but firm. "We will fight by your side, human, until the end." The alliance was no longer just a partnership of necessity. It was a bond forged in the fires of survival, and the chiral's knowledge, paired with humanity's military might, was now a force the Zothri could no longer ignore. The time for caution was over. The first strike was imminent. And as Anna prepared to lead humanity's forces into a conflict that could decide the fate of not just the chiral, but of all galactic civilizations, one truth echoed in her mind. The war against the Zothri had begun. The first strike was a calculated risk, a test of everything Anna and the chiral had worked for in the past few months. The small fleet they had assembled, half chiral ships, half human warships, was prepared to launch an assault on one of the Zothri's key supply hubs. It was a delicate mission, one that had to be precise if it were to succeed. Failure meant the Zothri would come down on them with overwhelming force, and the fragile alliance between humanity and the chiral could shatter before it had a chance to truly take hold. Anna stood on the bridge of the Asterisk Calderon Asterisk, one of humanity's newest warships, its dark hull gleaming in the artificial light of the command room. Her crew moved with efficiency, a blend of human and chiral officers working side by side. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on her as the fleet moved into position. "We're in range," Lieutenant Graves, her second-in-command, reported. His eyes were fixed on the display, tracking the movements of the Zothri ships near the supply depot. "The chiral are ready to launch their stealth drones, ma'am. They'll disable their outer defenses." Anna nodded, her gaze locked on the mission map. The chiral's stealth technology was ancient but effective, capable of bypassing most of the Zothri's outer sensor grids. It was their best chance to get in unnoticed, and they had only one shot at this. The moment their ships were detected, the Zothri would scramble their defenses, and the element of surprise would be lost. All units, prepare to engage, Anna ordered, her voice steady but intense. The crew sprang into action, every person knowing their role in this critical moment. Once the drones disable their outer perimeter, we move in. We hit them fast, hit them hard, and pull out before their reinforcements arrive. On the display screen, the first wave of chiral drones streaked out toward the Zothri depot, their sleek forms disappearing into the blackness of space. The seconds stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. The Corel had assured them the drones would be effective, but there was no guarantee. If the drones failed, the entire mission could be compromised. Then, without warning, the alert sounded. The drones had completed their task, and the Zothri's outer defenses flickered offline. The way was clear for the main assault. Anna's pulse quickened. "Go," she commanded. The fleet surged forward, engines blazing, as they moved to engage. The Zothri, caught off guard, scrambled to reposition their forces. But it was too late. The human ships unleashed a barrage of missiles, hitting their targets with pinpoint precision. Chiral warships followed suit, their weapons systems charging with a brilliance that had been all but forgotten in the years since their downfall. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, the Zothri appeared to be overwhelmed. Their ships scattered, firing back in a desperate attempt to regain control. But the human and chiral fleets were relentless, pushing forward with coordinated precision. Anna watched as the Zothri ships began to break apart under the sustained assault. The feeling of victory was short-lived, though. As the last of the Zothri's outer defenses crumbled, Anna's sensors detected a massive fleet approaching, reinforcements, far more ships than they had anticipated. The Zothri had been holding back, waiting for a larger response, and now they were closing in. "Status report," Anna barked. Lieutenant Graves's voice was tight with urgency. "We've done significant damage to the depot and the enemy fleet, but their reinforcements are too numerous. We won't be able to hold them off much longer without backup." Anna clenched her fists. She had to make a choice, and it had to be now. They had succeeded in damaging the Zothri's supply lines, but the cost would be high if they stayed and fought the reinforcements. The mission wasn't over, but it could easily end in disaster if they didn't retreat in time. "Pull back," Anna ordered, her voice resolute. "Get our people out of there. Now." The human and chiral ships began to fall back, firing a last barrage to cover their retreat. The Zothri ships pursued, but they were slower to respond, still reeling from the sudden assault. The damage they had taken was significant, enough to slow their reinforcements, long enough for Anna's fleet to escape. As the fleet jumped into hyperspace and the stars stretched into bright lines of light, Anna exhaled, her hands still gripping the armrests of her command chair. They had done it. The first strike had been a success. The Zothri had been wounded, their supply lines disrupted, and their momentum halted, at least for a moment. But the war was far from over. Anna knew that the Zothri would not take this defeat lying down. They would regroup, adapt, and come for them with renewed fury. The Corel were counting on humanity, and humanity had just proven that it could be trusted. But now, with the first battle won, Anna faced the daunting reality that the true conflict had only just begun. The Zothri had been warned. The galaxy would not fall without a fight, and this time they would not be fighting alone.